Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was transported to a medieval fantasy world with quirks as magic. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world broke in front of Izuku Midoriya. It wasn't a metaphorical break, not the emotional shattering he'd felt when All Might first told him he couldn't be a hero, nor the sickening crack of his own bones in the early days of wielding One for All. This was a literal, physical fracturing of reality itself. He was in the heart of Muzurufu's industrial district, a labyrinth of steel and concrete that had become a war zone. The air, thick with the smell of ozone and burnt asphalt, was filled with the cacophony of a desperate battle. His opponent, a villain calling himself Distortion, was a nightmare of physics. His quirk didn't just bend space. It shattered it like glass, creating invisible, razor-sharp edges in the air and folding locations on top of one another. One wrong step could see a hero bisected by a fold in reality, or find their attack landing 10 meters to the left of their target. Deku, now a seasoned young pro-hero, was a blur of green and black, his movements a symphony of controlled power. The green lightning of One for All, now a familiar and comforting aura, crackled around him, tracing arcs of light as he darted between collapsing girders and warped shipping containers. "You can't touch me, hero!" Distortion shrieked, his voice echoing from 3 places at once. He was a wiry man in a suit of cracked mirrors, each shard reflecting a different, distorted angle of the battlefield. "The world is my weapon. Every surface, every molecule, it all bends to my will." Deku didn't reply. Words were a waste of breath. He was deep in his analytical zone, murmuring faster than a bullet train. His quirk has a tell, a visual shimmer, like heat haze, just before a spatial fracture. The larger the warp, the longer the tell. He's favoring his left side for offensive fractures and his right for defensive displacement. Predictable pattern. But he's getting desperate. The patterns are becoming erratic. He skidded to a halt, the reinforced soles of his boots grinding on concrete. A shimmering wall of nothingness appeared directly in his path. He vaulted over it, the air behind him slicing a shipping container in half with a sickening shying sound. He landed, spun, and launched a 5% Delaware Smash Air Force, sending a volley of pressurized air bullets not at Distortion, but at the ground beneath a precariously balanced water tower. The villain laughed. "Missed me," the tower groaned, its legs buckling. It began to topple, aiming to crush the mirrored maniac. As expected, Distortion's focus snapped to the massive object. A wide, shimmering field appeared, intending to warp the entire tower into a harmless adjacent lot. "There!" Deku's mind screamed. "The tell is huge! He's overcommit!" This was his chance. The culmination of years of training, of broken bones and whispered encouragements from the vestiges of past heroes. He crouched low, digging his fingers into the asphalt to anchor himself. Green energy exploded from him, a tempest of raw power that kicked up a storm of dust and pebbles. The light was so bright it bleached the color from the world around him. One for All, full cowling. 45%. The power was immense, a roaring river threatening to burst its banks. It was a comfortable, controlled strain now, a far cry from the self-destructive agony of his first 100% smashes. He pushed off, the ground cracking under the force of his departure. He wasn't just running, he was a projectile. Detroit. He drew his right arm back, the energy of 9 generations of heroes coiling within it. He could see the whites of Distortion's eyes as the villain realized his mistake. The focus on the water tower had left him open for less than a second, but for Deku, a second was an eternity. But something was wrong. A new sound joined the fray. Not the clean slice of Distortion's quirk, but a guttural, tearing groan, like the universe itself was being ripped at the seams. Panic flashed across the villain's face, his control snapping. The shimmering field around the water tower flickered, spasmed, and then collapsed inward, not on the tower, but on Deku. The world didn't just break. It imploded. One moment he was hurtling toward his target, fist cocked to deliver a blow that would end the fight. The next, he was inside the quirk. Reality dissolved into a nauseating vortex of impossible colors and screaming physics. Up became down, sound had a texture, and light had a taste of copper and static. He felt the sensation of being pulled apart on a subatomic level, every cell screaming in protest. His punch, the 45% Detroit smash, connected with something, not flesh and bone, but a fabric of raw, chaotic space-time. The impact was absolute. The vortex, supercharged by the raw energy of One for All, detonated, and then, there was only darkness. And silence. The first sensation to return was pain. A deep, resonant ache that started in his bones and radiated outward, a familiar but unwelcome friend. The second was the smell. It was rich, loamy, and overwhelmingly green. The scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and 1,000 types of chlorophyll he didn't recognize. It was nothing like the ozone and concrete of Muzidifa. Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. Above him was a canopy of foliage so thick it blotted out the sky, woven from the leaves of colossal trees that seemed ancient and wise. Sunlight, a soft, emerald-filtered green, dappled the forest floor. He was lying on a bed of thick moss that had cushioned his landing, his body sprawled in a shallow crater of displaced earth. He pushed himself up, his head swimming. "Report, civilian status," he rasped, the words automatic, ingrained by years of training. The only answer was the chirping of an alien-sounding bird. He looked down at himself. His gamma costume was a wreck. The dark green fabric was torn in several places, and the metal plates on his shoulders and chest were dented and scratched. His mask was gone, likely ripped away in the vortex, and one of his iron saws was sparking feebly. He reached for the comms unit in his ear. "Static. This is Hero Deku. Does anyone copy? I need a status report on the villain distortion. Requesting medical and evac for civilians in the industrial sector." Over. More static, mocking and empty. A knot of cold dread began to form in his stomach. A spatial quirk could have thrown him miles away, but it shouldn't have been able to block every frequency. He was alone, utterly and completely alone. He staggered to his feet, hissing as his protesting muscles screamed. He did a quick self-assessment. Several cracked ribs, a possible concussion, and the profound, cellular exhaustion that came after a high percentage output. Manageable. He'd fought through worse. He took a moment to truly look at his surroundings. The trees were wrong. They were impossibly large, with silvery bark that seemed to hum with a faint energy. Strange, bioluminescent fungi clung to their roots, pulsing with soft blue and violet light even in the daytime. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the scent of unknown blossoms, and the sky, peeking through the canopy, he saw not the familiar blue of Earth's atmosphere, but a soft, teal-tinted expanse. "Okay, Izuku," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling slightly. "Analyze. Don't panic. Panic leads to mistakes." He limped to the edge of the small clearing his impact had made. The forest was dense, primordial. He had no idea which way to go. North? South? He didn't have a compass, and he couldn't see the sun clearly enough to get a bearing. His objective, for now, had to be simple: find civilization, find answers. A sudden, sharp snap of a twig to his right made him freeze. It was a heavy sound, far too heavy for a rabbit or a deer. He crouched low, the green lightning of full cowling flickering to life around him instinctually, though he kept it at a barely there 1% to conserve energy. A low growl rumbled through the undergrowth, a sound that vibrated in his chest and made the hairs on his arms stand on end. It wasn't the sound of any animal he knew. It was deeper, more guttural, laced with a chilling, predatory intelligence. From the shadows between two of the silver-barked behemoths, a creature emerged. It was shaped like a wolf, but it was larger than a grizzly bear, its form a hulking mass of muscle and mangy, pitch-black fur that seemed to drink the light around it. Its eyes were not eyes at all, but twin pools of smoldering, malevolent red embers. A foul, shadowy mist coiled off its body, and its claws were not made of keratin, but of solidified, jagged darkness that seemed to tear at the air itself. Deku's mind, the hero's mind, catalogued it instantly. Villain? Bioengineered Noma? An unknown animal with a powerful quirk? The creature, the gloom fawn, lowered its head and snarled, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. It wasn't just a predator, it was a monster from a nightmare. And it was looking straight at him. Before he could react, a scream cut through the forest. It was high-pitched, terrified, and it didn't come from his direction. It came from beyond the creature. Deku's head snapped up. His hero instincts overrode his confusion and pain in a nanosecond. Civilian in danger, he didn't hesitate. Pushing off the ground with a controlled burst of power, he vaulted over the Gloomfang's head. As he flew, he saw the source of the scream, a small, ramshackle wooden cart pulled by a strange, six-legged beast of burden, stopped dead on a narrow dirt path. A handful of people, dressed in simple, rustic tunics and leather clothes, were cowering behind it. A portly man, likely the merchant, was on his knees, trembling. The Gloomfang had been stalking them. He had simply been in its way. The beast roared in frustration, its red eyes locking onto him as he landed between it and the cart. It swiped at him, its shadowy claws leaving 5 deep, chilling gouges in the air where he'd just been. "Get back! Run!" Deku yelled at the terrified people, falling into a defensive stance. They just stared, their faces a mixture of terror and utter confusion at the sight of this green-clad, lightning-wreathed stranger. The Gloomfang lunged. Deku reacted with pure instinct. Shoot style, St. Louis smash. He kicked out, not with the full force of the named move, but with a precise, 8% burst of power aimed at the creature's shoulder. It was a feint, designed to knock it off balance. His reinforced boot connected with a sickening crunch of bone. The beast yelped, a sound of genuine pain, and stumbled back. It was strong, but it was physical. It could be hurt. That was all he needed to know. The creature recovered with unnatural speed, its rage palpable. It gathered itself and charged again, a juggernaut of shadow and fury. Deku sidestepped, the wind of its passage rustling his torn costume. He needed to end this quickly, without leveling the forest or terrifying the civilians any more than they already were. He needed one clean shot. As the Gloomfang spun around for another attack, Deku planted his feet. He channeled the power not into his entire body, but into his right arm, a controlled surge that felt like second nature. The green lightning intensified, crackling audibly. 8%. Detroit smash. He didn't aim for the head. He aimed for the center of mass, a blow designed to incapacitate, not kill. His fist connected with the creature's ribs. The impact was like a thunderclap in the quiet forest. There was no gore, no blood. Just a pure, concussive shockwave of kinetic energy. The Gloomfang was lifted from its feet, its massive body thrown backward as if struck by an invisible battering ram. It flew through the air, slammed into one of the giant silver trees with a sound that cracked the very wood, and then fell to the ground in a heap, motionless. A final, dark mist evaporated from its form, and it was still. Silence descended, broken only by Deku's own heavy breathing and the distant, panicked chirping of birds. He stood over the creature, his fist still smoking slightly with residual energy, the green lightning receding back into his skin. He turned to the people he had saved. "Is everyone all right? Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle, trying to be reassuring. The response was not what he expected. The portly merchant stared at him, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with something that went beyond fear into the realm of religious awe. The others, a woman and 2 young men, had fallen to their knees, their hands clasped together as if in prayer. They weren't looking at a hero. They were looking at an idol, a spirit. The woman whispered, her voice trembling. "A forest spirit, clad in emerald and lightning." "No, an angel of vengeance," one of the young men breathed, his eyes fixed on the defeated Gloomfang. He struck it down with a bolt of pure light. Deku blinked, his mind struggling to process their words. "Spirit? Angel? What are they talking about?" No, I'm not," he started, taking a step forward. "My name is Deku. I'm a pro-hero." His words, his very title, meant nothing to them. They flinched back as he moved, as if his presence alone was a sanctified, terrifying thing. The merchant finally found his voice, scrambling backward on his hands and knees. "Please, Great One. We meant no trespass. We have little to offer, but take what you will. Spare our lives," he begged, bowing his head to the dirt. Deku's heart sank. This was wrong. All wrong. He was supposed to inspire hope, not this kind of primal fear. He was used to civilians being scared of the villain, not of him. He opened his mouth to try and explain again, to tell them about quirks, about his world, but he knew it would be useless. They were looking at him, but they weren't seeing him. They saw the impossible power, the crackling divine energy, and the effortless felling of a monster they clearly believed to be invincible. It was in that moment, watching these simple people prostrate themselves before him, that the true, horrifying scale of his displacement crashed down on him. He wasn't just lost. He was in a place that didn't play by his rules. A place where one for all wasn't a quirk, but something else entirely. Something to be feared. Stand down, you oafs. You're scaring him. The voice was female, sharp and cynical, cutting through the terrified whispers like a well-honed dagger. It came from the shadows behind the cart. A figure emerged, stepping gracefully into the dappled light. She was a young woman, perhaps a few years older than him, with a lean, wiry build. She was dressed in practical, dark leather armor that was scuffed and worn, with a short sword at her hip and a pair of daggers strapped to her thigh. Her face was sharp and angular, framed by a messy shock of dark, chin-length hair. But it was her eyes that held him. They were a piercing shade of amber, intelligent, cautious, and utterly devoid of the awe or fear that gripped the others. She was assessing him, not as a god or a monster, but as a problem to be solved. She had been there the whole time, hidden. He hadn't even sensed her. She jabbed a thumb at the still cowering merchant. I'm the one he hired for protection. Lyra. Looks like you did my job for me. She glanced at the dead Gloomfang, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing her features before being quickly suppressed. And then some. Deku stared at her, relief washing over him. Finally, someone who wasn't on their knees. You're not scared? Lyra let out a short, humorless laugh. Scared is for people who have the luxury. I'm too busy being intrigued. She took a step closer, her amber eyes scanning him from head to toe, lingering on the tears in his strange green armor and the way he held his aching ribs. You're not from around here. That's obvious. Your clothes, your speech, your everything. Deku began, but his head was spinning. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a dizzying wave of exhaustion and pain. He swayed on his feet. Lyra's cynical expression softened with a sliver of concern. Easy there, lightning thrower. You're hurt. She turned to the merchant, who was slowly getting to his feet. Get him some water, Baron. The least you can do is show some gratitude to the man who saved your worthless hide. Baron, startled into action, scrambled to a cask on the side of his cart. Deku gratefully accepted a wooden cup of cool, clean water, drinking it down in 3 long gulps. Lyra watched him, her arms crossed. That thing, she said, nodding towards the Gloomfang, is a nightmare. Knights in full plate have trouble with them. Yet you. She trailed off, shaking her head slightly. Whatever that light show was, it's a powerful gift. Gift? Deku repeated, the word alien on his tongue. You mean a quirk? Lyra's brow furrowed. Quirk? Never heard of it. I'm talking about a gift. The magic you're born with. Though I've never seen a gift that destructive. Or that bright. She paused, her gaze sharp and penetrating. Power like that paints a target on your back in this kingdom. Especially now. Showing it off like that was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I had to protect them, Deku said simply, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. It was the core of his being, the only truth that still made sense in this chaotic new reality. Lyra studied him for a long moment, a complex expression on her face. It was a look that seemed to weigh his sincerity against a lifetime of learned cynicism. Finally, she sighed. You're a strange one, she said. You've got the power of a demigod and the brain of a lost puppy. She looked around at the oppressive, alien forest. You're lost, aren't you? No idea where you are or where you're going. Deku could only nod, the full weight of his situation pressing down on him. The fight, the strange world, the terrified civilians, the enigmatic rogue, it was too much. The world was starting to tilt again. I need to find a city, he managed to say. A place with information. A way to contact my home. Lyra's lips twisted into a wry smile. I can help with the first part. The second part. I wouldn't get your hopes up. She uncrossed her arms. Look, Baron here was paying me to get his goods to the town of Ironwood. It's a few days' travel from here. It's not the capital, but it's big enough. You'll find answers there, or at least a bed that isn't a pile of moss. She offered him a deal. You look like you can handle yourself, but you're injured and you stick out like a sore thumb. I know the roads, the dangers, and how to not get cheated or stabbed. You travel with us, act as our muscle, our very, very big muscle, and I'll guide you to Ironwood. Deal? Deku looked at her outstretched hand, then at the wary but hopeful faces of the merchant and his family. He was alone, injured, and in a world that made no sense. This woman, Lyra, was his only anchor. She was offering a path, a direction. It was more than he'd had 5 minutes ago. He took her hand. Her grip was firm, calloused. Deal, he said. Good, she said, dropping his hand. First rule, try not to explode with divine light every time a squirrel farts. It draws the wrong kind of attention. Despite everything, a small, tired smile touched Deku's lips. I'll try my best. As Baron began to coax his 6-legged animal back into motion and the small caravan prepared to move on, Deku took one last look at the clearing. The crater from his landing, the dead monster, the impossibly large trees. It was real. This was all real. He walked beside Lyra, falling into step with the slow pace of the cart. This kingdom, he asked, the final, crucial question bubbling up. What's it called? Lyra gave him a sideways glance, as if surprised he didn't even know that much. You're in the kingdom of Ethelgard, stranger, she said, her voice low. And you've picked one hell of a time to visit, Ethelgard. The name was foreign, mythical. It sealed the final nail in the coffin of his hope for a quick return. He wasn't in a lost corner of Japan. He wasn't in some villain's elaborate illusion. He was somewhere else entirely, standing under an unfamiliar sky, with the legacy of 9 heroes burning in his soul and a world of new, unknown dangers stretching out before him. The path home was gone, and a new, terrifying path had just begun. The first night in Ethelgard was the longest of Izuku Midoriya's life. He sat by a crackling campfire, the warmth a welcome comfort against the strange, chilling dampness of the forest. Above, through the gaps in the gnarled branches, a tapestry of alien constellations glittered in the teal-hued sky. 2 moons, one a perfect silver sphere and its smaller, scarred companion, hung like celestial eyes, watching him. Everything from the 6-legged beast of burden, which Lyra called a silt strider, huffing softly nearby, to the taste of the tough, smoky meat she'd given him, was a constant, jarring reminder that he was no longer home. Lyra sat across the fire from him, sharpening one of her daggers with a whetstone. The rhythmic shhk of steel on stone was the only sound for a long while, save for the chirps and clicks of nocturnal creatures he couldn't name. The merchant, Baron, and his 2 young assistants had retired to their cart, casting nervous, reverent glances at Deku before disappearing behind a canvas flap. They still saw him as some kind of holy weapon, a perception that sat on his shoulders like a lead weight. Lyra, however, watched him with an unnerving, analytical intensity. She hadn't asked any more probing questions since their initial bargain, for which he was grateful. But he could feel her curiosity, a palpable force across the flickering flames. He finally broke the silence, the question burning in his mind since she'd first said the word. Lyra, you mentioned a gift before. What is it exactly? Is it common? Lyra paused her sharpening, her amber eyes catching the firelight. Common enough, she said, her voice a low murmur. Most people have one. It's the magic you're born with, a part of you, like the color of your eyes or the shape of your hands. It just is. Deku leaned forward, his analytical mind kicking in, the familiar comfort of information gathering momentarily overriding his anxiety. So it's like a quirk, then. A meta-ability. She tilted her head, the unfamiliar words not quite registering. A what? Look, it's simple. Most gifts are small things. The baker in my home village has a gift that keeps his bread from ever burning. A farmer might have a knack for coaxing stubborn seeds to sprout. My old neighbor, bless her crooked back, could mend cracked pottery just by holding the pieces together. She gestured with her dagger. Practical things. Small magics that make life a little easier. And the nobles? Deku pressed. You said power like mine paints a target. A shadow passed over Lyra's face, her cynical guard returning in full force. Ah, yes. The nobles. Their gifts aren't for mending pots. The great houses of Ethelgard have powerful, generational gifts. The house of Valerius can command fire. The house of Brian can shape stone. And the royal line, they say they can weave pure light into solid matter. Her voice was tinged with a bitterness that spoke of deep-seated resentment. Power begets power. The strong rule, the weak serve. That's the way of the world. The parallels were staggering. Quirks that were flashy and powerful often led to a life of heroism and fame, while those with minor or villainous quirks faced prejudice. It was the same social dynamic, just with a different name. And Lord Malachar? Deku asked, his voice soft. The one you said is in charge? The rhythmic sound of the whetstone stopped completely. Lyra placed the dagger down with slow, deliberate care. The fire crackled, suddenly seeming much louder in the tense silence. Malachar, she said, the name like a curse on her lips. Malachar was a minor lord from a forgotten house. Ambitious. Cunning. His gift was once thought to be weak, almost useless. She locked eyes with him, her expression grim. He can absorb the memories of anyone he touches. A simple touch, and he knows your secrets. For years, he used it to play the game of court, learning blackmail, uncovering plots, making himself indispensable. But he learned something else, too. He learned how to push his gift further. She picked up a dry twig and tossed it into the fire, watching it blacken and burn. He found a way. A way to not just read the essence of a person, but to drain it. He can steal gifts, Izuku. Deku felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the night air. Steal them? He takes them, she confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. All of it. He lays a hand on you, and it feels like your soul is being siphoned out through a straw. The gift, the magic that has been a part of you your entire life, is ripped away. And he adds it to his own. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her knee. 10 years ago, he began. He started with minor rivals, nobles who slighted him. They'd be found in their chambers, hale of body but empty. Blank. Their fire gift gone. Their strength vanished. Just hollow shells. The comparison hit Deku with the force of a physical blow. A man who could steal and stockpile abilities. A tyrant who built his power on the ruin of others, all for one. When he was ready, he moved on the royal family. Lyra continued, her voice flat and dead, as if reciting a well-rehearsed tragedy. He cornered the king during a council meeting. In front of 24 of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom, he put his hand on the king's chest and stole his gift of light weaving. The king didn't even scream. He just collapsed. The light in him was gone. She finally looked up from the fire, her eyes filled with a helpless rage. Some nobles fought. Lord Valerius tried to incinerate him. Malachar just smiled, raised a hand, and snuffed the flames. He'd already stolen a gift of nullification from another lord a month prior. Then he walked over, took Valerius's fire for himself, and burned the man to ash with his own power. After that, no one else dared to fight. He took the throne. And he's been sitting on it ever since, a dragon hoarding stolen treasure. Deku's mind reeled. This wasn't just a tyrant. This was his nemesis, reborn in a different world. A man who embodied the ultimate perversion of power, taking from others to empower the self, the polar opposite of one for all's creed of giving. What happens to them? Deku asked, his throat dry. The people whose gifts he steals. They become like you, Lyra said, her words sharp, but not unkindly. They become unblessed. Unblessed. The word struck him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It echoed in the deepest, most wounded parts of his soul. It was a new word, a foreign word, but he understood its meaning with a horrifying, gut-wrenching familiarity. He was suddenly no longer in a forest in Ethelgard. He was 4 years old, in a doctor's office, the chair too big for him. He could see the X-ray of his foot, the damning presence of an extra toe joint. You should probably give it up. He was in his apartment, his mother holding him, her tears soaking his hair as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm sorry." Over and over, Words that were meant to comfort but only confirmed his brokenness. He was in the schoolyard, Kakin and his friends standing over him, smoke rising from their palms. You're useless. A quirkless loser. You can't be a hero. Unblessed. Quirkless. Defective. Worthless. He realized his hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists, his knuckles white. The pain he felt wasn't for himself. He had one for all now. He was blessed beyond measure. The pain was a phantom limb, an ache for the boy he used to be, and a burning, immediate empathy for the victims of this world's all for one. To have a part of yourself, a power you known your whole life, and then to have it stolen, leaving you empty, it was a cruelty he couldn't fathom. He instinctively touched his chest, feeling the deep, thrumming well of power within him. The embers of heroes. He felt the phantom presences of the previous users, a silent, comforting weight. He was the antithesis of Malachar. He was given power to protect. Malachar took power to rule. Izuku? Lyra's voice cut through his dark thoughts. You alright? You look like you've seen a ghost. He looked up, his eyes filled with a fire she hadn't seen before. I'm fine, he said, his voice low but steady. Thank you for telling me. He wasn't fine. He was furious. A righteous, heroic fury was building in his chest, a fire that burned away his fear and confusion. He wasn't just lost anymore. He was a hero in a land that desperately needed one. He flexed his fingers, feeling the ghost of one for all's lightning. He thought of his ribs, still tender and cracked. He was used to recovery girls' miraculous healing. A kiss, a nap, and he'd be back to full strength. Here, a cracked rib was a multi-week injury. A broken arm could mean the end of his ability to fight. He had no support, no mentor to call, no advanced medical technology. The responsibility was his and his alone. The weight of one for all had never felt heavier, or more vital. 2 days later, the dense, primordial forest began to thin, giving way to rolling green hills and cultivated farmland. The change was a relief, but the sight of the first village they came across quickly soured the mood. It was a sad, tired-looking place called Oakhaven. The thatched roofs of the small wattle-and-daub houses were in disrepair, and the fields, though green, seemed to lack vibrancy. The people moved with a listless, weary air, their shoulders slumped in perpetual defeat. There was no laughter, no children playing in the muddy street. There was only a heavy blanket of oppressive silence. Tithe day, Lyra muttered under her breath as they guided the cart into the village square. Bad timing. A group of 5 soldiers stood near the village well. They were clad in mismatched iron and leather armor bearing the sigil of a grasping black hand, Malachar's crest. They weren't elite guards. They were thugs in uniform, their faces cruel and bored. A large cart, already laden with sacks of grain, cages of chickens, and a few meager-looking barrels, stood behind them. The leader, a thick-necked captain with a jagged scar across his cheek, was berating a gaunt, elderly farmer. This is all you have, old man? The captain sneered, kicking a half-empty sack of potatoes. The Lord's mercy is great, but his patience is thin. You know the price of disloyalty. It is all we can spare, Captain Forelag, the old man pleaded, his voice thin and reedy. The rains were poor this season. We barely have enough to feed our own. The captain, Forelag, laughed, a harsh, grating sound. The Lord provides the sun and the rain. It is your failing, not his, if the harvest is weak. His eyes fell on a small, crudely carved wooden bird clutched in the hands of a little girl hiding behind the old man's legs. What's that? The girl flinched, hiding the toy behind her back. It's nothing, sir, the grandfather said quickly. Just a toy. Everything in this village belongs to the Lord, Forelag declared, his eyes gleaming with petty malice. He took a step forward. Give it here. Deku, standing by their cart, felt his blood run cold. He saw the little girl's terrified eyes, the grandfather's helpless despair. It was the same story, repeated across time and worlds, the strong preying on the weak. His every instinct, every fiber of his being, screamed at him to intervene. Don't, Lyra hissed beside him, her hand gripping his arm. This isn't your fight, Izuku. They're just soldiers. Annoy them, and they'll leave. Fight them, and they'll bring back an army. You can't save everyone. Her words were pragmatic, sensible. They were the words of a survivor. But Deku wasn't a survivor. He was a hero. She's right, he whispered back, his eyes never leaving the scene. I can't save everyone. He gently removed her hand from his arm. But I can save them. Before Lyra could protest, he was moving. He didn't charge in with lightning crackling. He simply walked forward, his posture calm and non-threatening. His footsteps were silent on the muddy ground. Excuse me, he said, his voice polite but firm. It cut through the tension, drawing the attention of all 5 soldiers. They turned to face him, their expressions shifting from bored cruelty to annoyance. And who in the blazes are you? Captain Forelag grunted, looking Deku up and down. His gaze lingered on the strange, torn green costume and the metal on his boots. Some kind of mummer? My name is Deku, he said, stopping a respectful distance away. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. That toy belongs to the child. It has no value. Forelag let out a disbelieving snort. Value is what I say it is. Now get out of my sight before I lose my temper, green man. He turned his back on Deku, reaching for the little girl's toy again. That was his mistake. Deku moved. He activated full cowling at a quiet, controlled 5%. To the onlookers, it wasn't a flash of lightning, just an impossible, unnatural burst of speed. In the space of a single heartbeat, he closed the distance. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He simply plucked the captain's sword from its scabbard with 2 fingers. Forelag's hand went to his hip, his eyes widening in shock as he found the scabbard empty. He spun around to see Deku standing there, holding the sword casually by the pommel. I think you dropped this, Deku said, his expression still calm. The other 4 soldiers, seeing their captain disarmed in the blink of an eye, finally reacted. With roars of anger, they drew their own weapons and charged. Lyra, watching from the cart, swore under her breath and put a hand on the hilt of her own sword. This was it. The stupid, heroic fool was going to get them all killed. But Deku was a whirlwind of precise, non-lethal action. The first soldier swung a heavy axe. Deku sidestepped with fluid grace, his foot tapping the man's ankle. The soldier's balance was thrown, and he stumbled forward into his comrade. Deku chopped the side of the first soldier's neck with the edge of his hand, a perfectly controlled blow that made the man's eyes roll back before he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The second soldier, tangled with the first, was disarmed with a quick twist of the wrist that sent his mace flying. A flick of Deku's fingers against the pressure point on his shoulder made the man's entire arm go numb and useless. He yelped in surprise and pain, stumbling back. The third and fourth attacked from either side. Deku dropped low, sweeping his leg out in a move that would have shattered their bones at a higher percentage. At 5%, it simply knocked their feet out from under them. They hit the mud with wet, undignified squelches. Before they could recover, he had disarmed them both, their swords sticking up in the mud a few feet away. It had taken less than 5 seconds. 4 soldiers were neutralized, their weapons scattered, without a single life-threatening injury dealt. It was a display of such overwhelming speed and control that the entire village square was left in stunned silence. Captain Forelag stared, his jaw hanging open. He was a bully and a brute, but he knew combat. What he had just witnessed wasn't a fight. It was a force of nature wearing a human face. What are you? He stammered, his bravado completely gone. I'm a hero, Deku said, his voice soft but carrying an unshakable authority. He tossed the captain's sword, which landed point down in the mud at his feet. Now, you will return what you have taken from these people. And then you will leave this village and not return. Rage and humiliation warred with fear on Forelag's face. Fear won, but the rage remained. You'll regret this. He spat. Lord Malachar will hear of this. He'll send a knight captain. He'll leave, Deku repeated, his voice dropping an octave. This time, he let a faint flicker of green lightning dance across his knuckles. It was a tiny display, barely there, but in the gray, dreary village, it shone like a star. That was the final straw. Forelag scrambled for his sword, not to fight, but to flee. He and his conscious men gathered their unconscious comrade and practically fell over each other in their haste to get to their cart and retreat, leaving the stolen goods behind. As the soldiers vanished down the road, A collective sigh of relief went through the villagers. The old man rushed forward, the little girl still hiding behind him. "Thank you, sir," he said, bowing low. "Thank you? No one has ever stood up to them for us." Deku smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed to light up his face. "It's what heroes do." He crouched down, meeting the little girl's wide, curious eyes. He held out her wooden bird. "Here, I believe this is yours." Timidly, she took it, her tiny fingers brushing his. She gave him a small, shy smile before burying her face in her grandfather's leg. Lyra walked up behind him, her arms crossed. Her face was an unreadable mask, but her amber eyes were fixed on him. "That was, without a doubt, the single most idiotic and reckless thing I have ever seen," she said flatly. Deku stood up, his smile fading slightly. "They were hurting people, and now Malaker's forces will be looking for the green man with lightning in his fists," she shot back. "You've traded a moment of peace for a lifetime of trouble. You painted a target not just on your back, but on ours, and on this whole village." He couldn't argue with her logic. But he couldn't regret his actions either. "Then I'll just have to be strong enough to protect them, too," he said, his gaze sweeping over the villagers who were now looking at him with expressions of pure, unadulterated hope. Lyra was silent for a long moment. She watched as the villagers began to reclaim their food, a spark of life returning to their eyes. She saw the way Deku looked at them, not with pride or arrogance, but with a deep, genuine concern. Her cynicism, the hard-won shield she had carried for years, had a tiny, hairline crack in it. "You're an idiot," she finally said, but there was no heat in it this time. She turned and walked back to the cart. "But you're a useful idiot. Let's get moving before some other heroics get us killed." As they prepared to leave, the whispers started. The villagers spoke in hushed, awestruck tones. "Did you see how he moved? Like the wind itself. He wasn't a man. He was a bolt of lightning in the shape of one. The soldiers' swords, they just flew from their hands. He shone, like an emerald." The legend of the Emerald Knight had its first witnesses. Hundreds of miles away, in the heart of the kingdom, the capital city of Ethelgard sat like a spider in the center of a vast web. At its very core, carved from black obsidian and towering over the rest of the city, was the citadel of Shadow's Reach. Within its highest tower, in a throne room vast and cold enough to chill the soul, Lord Malachor sat upon the rune-carved throne. The throne itself was an artifact said to amplify the gift of the rightful king. In Malachor's hands, it amplified his stolen hoard. He was a man of indeterminate age, with sharp, aristocratic features, pale skin, and eyes as black and empty as a starless night. He was listening to the report of a cowering Captain Forlag, his fingers steepled before him. "And he was clad in strange green armor, my lord," Forlag stammered, kneeling on the polished floor. "He moved faster than sight and had the strength of 10 men. He disarmed us all without breaking a sweat. And there was a light, my lord. A green lightning that danced on his skin." Malachor was silent for a long time, his black eyes unblinking. His spies and soldiers brought him news of rebellions, bandits, and rivalries daily. It was all so tedious, so predictable. But this was new. "A gift of enhanced speed and strength is common enough, Captain," Malachor said, his voice a smooth, silken baritone that slid over the skin like cold oil. "Even combined, it is not unheard of. But this lightning, you say it was part of him?" "Yes, my lord. It came from his very skin. It was not like the fire of House Valerius or the summoned storms of the southern mages. It was innate. Personal," Forlag explained, desperate to please. A flicker of genuine interest sparked in Malachor's dead eyes. He was a connoisseur of gifts, a collector of the unique and the powerful. He had hundreds stored within him, a vast library of stolen power. He could shatter stone, command the wind, read minds, heal wounds, and kill with a thought. But he had never encountered a gift of innate lightning. It sounded pure, primal, and he called himself Deku, Malachor mused, testing the strange word on his tongue. "He interfered with a lawful tithe, assaulted my soldiers, and vanished. A new player has stepped onto the board." He dismissed the terrified captain with a wave of his hand. Forlag scrambled out of the throne room as if the hounds of hell were at his heels. Malachor was left alone in the cavernous chamber. He rose from his throne and walked to a great, black-paned window that overlooked the city. He held up a hand, and a small, flickering ball of stolen fire appeared in his palm. It was a powerful gift, taken from a proud lord. But it felt second-hand. It was a tool he wielded, this Green Knight, as the whispers from Oakhaven were already calling him. His power sounded like it was part of his very being. A fundamental expression of his existence. A gift of that magnitude, of that purity, was a rare jewel indeed. It was a masterpiece for his collection. He let the fire in his palm die out. A slow, acquisitive smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a dragon that has just caught the scent of a new, priceless treasure for its hoard. "Find me this emerald knight," he whispered to the empty room, his voice echoing in the cold silence. "I wish to see this gift for myself." He paused, his black eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. "Before I take it." The days that followed their flight from Oakhaven bled into one another in a montage of weary travel and simmering tension. The dirt track wound its way through rolling hills that were slowly giving way to more rugged, stony terrain. The shadow of the northern mountains loomed on the horizon, a jagged black line against the teal sky. Izuku learned more about this world in those few days than he could have ever imagined. He learned it in the way Lyra would instinctively stop the cart and fall silent, her head cocked, listening for the distant call of a cliff darter, a predatory bird known to attack pack animals. He learned it in the way Baron the merchant would carefully inspect every stream before letting his silt strider drink, checking for the slick, oily sheen of glimmerweed, a plant that could paralyze a creature twice its size. Most of all, he learned it from Lyra's constant, cynical commentary. She was a fountain of grim, practical knowledge. "Don't eat the red berries," she'd said on the first day, slapping his hand away from a tempting-looking bush. "They won't kill you. They'll just make you see the world melt for a week. Less useful than you'd think." That path looked shorter, he'd pointed out on the second, gesturing to a trail that cut through a quiet, misty valley. "That's the Whispering Pass," she'd replied without looking. "They call it that because the wind sounds like voices. And also because if you go in there, you're never heard from again. Stick to the road, puppy." He was puppy now, a step up from lightning thrower, he supposed. The name was a mix of derision for his earnest naivety and a grudging affection he was beginning to detect beneath her thorny exterior. His body ached constantly. The cracked ribs were a persistent, sharp reminder of his newfound vulnerability. Every deep breath was a chore, every sudden movement a risk. He had to be careful, to ration his strength in a way he never had before. Back home, an injury was a temporary setback. Here, it was a potential death sentence. He found himself cataloging his own pain with the same analytical fervor he usually reserved for villains' quirks. The whispers of his own legend followed them. On the third day, they passed a group of pilgrims heading south. Their eyes widened as they saw him, clad in his strange, torn green suit. They didn't approach, but he heard their hushed words carried on the wind as they passed. "The Emerald Knight, they say he commands the storm." Faced down a dozen of Malakur's men and they fled like frightened sheep. Lyra had just smirked. "See? A moment of heroics, a lifetime of reputation. Hope you're ready for the ballads they'll sing when Malakur's assassins put your head on a spike." Despite her fatalism, he saw the way she watched him now. When he helped Baron resecure a loose wheel on the cart, effortlessly lifting a corner of the heavily laden vehicle, she didn't mock him. She just watched, her amber eyes narrowed in thought. When he spent an evening trying to stitch a tear in his costume with a crude needle and thread, she had watched for 10 minutes before snatching it from him with an exasperated sigh and finishing the job with quick, deft movements. Finally, after 5 days of travel that felt like a month, they saw it. Nestled in a wide valley carved by an ancient river, protected by a formidable curtain of high, gray stone walls, was the town of Ironwood. Great plumes of dark smoke rose from 100 chimneys, staining the sky. Even from a distance, they could hear the rhythmic, ceaseless clang of hammers on anvils, the heartbeat of the town. The name was fitting. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress, built for function and defense, not comfort. As they approached the main gate, the oppressive atmosphere of Malakur's rule became palpable. The guards wore the same grasping black hand sigil as the thugs in Oakhaven, but their armor was better, their spears sharper, and their eyes colder. They scrutinized every person entering or leaving the city, their gazes lingering on any who looked out of place. Baron, a seasoned merchant, handled the entry tax and the cursory inspection with a practiced obsequiousness that made Deku's stomach turn. The guards gave their party a long look, their eyes lingering on Deku's strange attire and Lyra's collection of blades. "What's with the mummer?" one guard grunted, jabbing a thumb at Deku. "Bodyguard," Lyra said smoothly, her voice betraying no emotion. "A little eccentric, but he's good at his job. Tends to scare off bandits." The guard grunted again, unconvinced but ultimately uninterested in starting trouble. He waved them through. The massive, iron-banded gates groaned shut behind them, the sound echoing with a grim finality. The inside of Ironwood was a maze of narrow, cobblestone streets, crowded with people who kept their heads down and their mouths shut. The air smelled of coal smoke, hot metal, and damp stone. The sound of the forges was everywhere, a constant, deafening clangor that seemed to get inside your bones. This was the industrial heart of Ethelgard's northern territories, the place that forged the weapons and armor for Malaker's armies. It was a town built on grit and fire, but it had no warmth. "All right, first things first," Lyra said, her voice raised to be heard over the din. "Baron, you get your goods to the market. Izuku, you and I need to find a smith. That outfit of yours is falling apart. You can't be a proper holy terror if you're worried about a breeze." Baron, ever grateful, insisted on helping. "Most of the master smiths were conscripted for the Citadel forges," he explained, wiping sweat from his brow. "But I know a man. Theron. Best in the town, though he keeps to himself. He can fix anything made of metal. For special work, though, for anything that needs more than just a hammer, he works with a strange one. A disgraced knight." Deku's interest was piqued. "Disgraced?" Sir Kalen, Baron said, his voice dropping. "From the House of Brine. His family had a powerful gift, rune forging, they called it. Could inscribe metal with magic, strength, sharpness, resilience, you name it. But his house fell. Sided with the wrong lord during Malaker's rise, they say. Framed for treason. Kalen was the only survivor. Stripped of his title and lands. Now he just exists. Does odd jobs for Theron. A great talent wasted." Lyra's eyes met Deku's. "A master craftsman with a unique gift, living in the shadows. It was a long shot, but he was the best lead they had." Baron gave them directions, leading them away from the bustling main streets into a labyrinth of grimy back alleys where the smoke hung thick and low. He pointed them toward a heavy, unmarked wooden door set into a soot-stained stone wall, tucked between a tannery and a grimy tavern. "That's Theron's forge," he said. "You'll likely find Kalen there. Be patient with him. The world has not been kind." With a final, thankful nod, Baron left to attend to his business, leaving Deku and Lyra alone in the shadowed alley. Lyra took a deep breath. "Well, puppy. Let's go meet the rusty knight." She knocked on the heavy door. A moment later, it creaked open a few inches. A massive, bald man with a beard like a spade and arms as thick as tree trunks peered out. This was clearly Theron, the smith. "We're closed," he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "We were told you're the best," Lyra said, her voice shifting into a charming, persuasive tone. "And that you work with a specialist. My friend here has some unique armor that needs repair." Theron's eyes fell on Deku, taking in the bizarre green costume. He grunted, a sound of mild interest, and opened the door wider. "Let's see it." The forge was a cavern of heat and shadows. It was cluttered but meticulously organized. Racks of tools lined the walls, tongs of every size, hammers of every weight. The central forge glowed with a core of white-hot coals, casting dancing shadows everywhere. And standing near a heavy anvil in the corner, his back to them, was another man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, though he carried himself with a slight slump, as if bearing an invisible weight. He wore a simple leather apron over a tunic, his powerful arms coated in a fine layer of soot. His hair was a dark, unruly mop, streaked with premature gray at the temples. As they entered, he turned, and Deku saw his face. It was a strong, noble face that had been weathered by hardship, etched with lines of grief and frustration. His eyes, a deep, stormy gray, held the weary, haunted look of a man who had lost everything. This was Sir Kalen. He glanced at them, then at Deku's costume, his expression a mask of profound indifference. I don't mend clothes, Theron. It's not just cloth, Lyra interjected, stepping forward. Look closer. Kalen's gaze swept over Deku again, this time with a craftsman's eye. He saw the high-tensile fibers woven into the green fabric, the strange, lightweight metal of the gauntlets and greaves. His brow furrowed. He stepped closer, his initial dismissal giving way to professional curiosity. He ran a callous finger over one of Deku's dented gauntlets. What alloy is this? He asked, his voice a low baritone, rough from disuse. It's lighter than steel, but the density. I've never seen anything like it. I don't know, Deku answered honestly. It was made for me back home, Kalen grunted, his eyes scanning the damage to the suit. The tears, the dents, the sparking iron soul. This damage, it's not from swords or arrows. This is from immense kinetic force. What did you get hit by? A catapult? Something like that, Deku said evasively. Kalen straightened up, his brief flicker of interest extinguished. The materials are foreign. The work is complex. It would take weeks, and a small fortune in resources I don't have. I can't help you. He turned to go back to his work. Please, Deku said, his voice earnest. It's more than just armor to me. It's important. Kalen stopped, but didn't turn around. Many things are important. Honor. Family. A good name. All can be lost. Your suit will be no different. The world breaks things. It's what it does. The bitterness in his voice was a raw, open wound. This was it. The moment of truth. Deku knew he couldn't explain about hero society or support companies. He had to use the language of this world, the truth of his power. The force that damaged it, it came from me, Deku said quietly. That made Kalen turn around fully. He stared at Deku, a skeptical frown on his face. Your gift? You have a gift of self-destruction? How novel. No, Deku said, shaking his head. My power, it's not a normal gift. It's something I was given. It's a power that's passed down, from one person to the next. It stockpiles strength with each new user. The forge, which had been filled with the hiss of coals and the distant clang of metal, suddenly fell completely, deathly silent. Theron, the large smith, froze mid-motion. Lyra's cynical smirk faltered, but it was Kalen whose reaction was the most profound. The color drained from his face. His weary, indifferent eyes widened, the gray irises seeming to ignite with a sudden, shocked light. He took a half-step back, his mouth slightly agape, as if Deku had just spoken a blasphemous, forgotten word. What did you just say? Kalen whispered, his voice trembling. My power, Deku repeated, confused by the extreme reaction. It's a legacy. Passed from one champion to another. Kalen dropped the hammer he was holding. It hit the stone floor with a loud clang that made them all jump. He stared at Deku, not at his suit, not at his face, but through him, as if seeing something else entirely. A ghost, a memory, a myth. The embers of heroes, Kalen breathed, the words barely audible. No, it can't be. It's a myth. A fairy tale for children. Lyra stepped forward, her hand moving subtly closer to one of her daggers. Kalen, what are you talking about? Kalen ignored her. His eyes, now blazing with a wild, desperate hope, were locked on Deku. The legend, from the age of myth. Before the kingdom was even founded, it tells of a great darkness that threatened to consume the world. The heroes of that age, unable to defeat it, poured their spirits, their strength, their hope, into a single vessel. A power that could be passed on, growing stronger with each generation, waiting for a time of greatest need. He took a stumbling step closer to Deku, his big hands shaking. The texts, my family kept the old lore. They said the power would manifest as a storm of righteous energy around the user, that its wielder would possess the strength of 100 men. That they would be a stranger, arriving when all hope seemed lost. He looked at Deku's green costume, the lightning he'd heard whispers of, the impossible strength. It was all clicking into place in his mind, not as a coincidence, but as a prophecy fulfilled. It is a story, Kalen, Lyra said, her voice sharp, trying to ground him. You've been cooped up in this forge for too long. A story? Kalen's voice rose, filled with a passion that had likely been dormant for a decade. I saw you fight, boy. Not you, but your work. He jabbed a finger at Deku. The whispers from Oakhaven reached the city. A green knight who moved like the wind and disarmed 5 soldiers without killing them. That is not the work of a common brawler with a strength gift. That is the control, the precision of a true champion. Deku was stunned into silence. One for all. The embers of heroes. A power of unity and hope, passed down to fight a great darkness. The description was so perfect, so impossibly accurate, it sent a shiver down his spine. He wasn't just a lost teenager anymore. He was, in the eyes of this broken man, the living embodiment of a divine myth. The weight of that realization was crushing. The sheer emotional and physical toll of the last week finally caught up to him. The revelation, the constant pain in his ribs, the crushing weight of his new reality, it was too much. The forge began to swim before his eyes. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he staggered, catching himself on a workbench. I need to sit down, he mumbled. Kalen, his fervor instantly replaced by concern, rushed forward and guided him to a stool in a quieter corner of the forge. Of course. Forgive me. The shock. He's exhausted, Lyra said, her voice clipped, though her eyes held a flicker of worry. He's been running on fumes for days. Deku sat heavily on the stool, his head in his hands. The world felt unreal, a dream turning into a nightmare, or perhaps something else entirely. He was so tired. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, and the darkness claimed him. He wasn't in the forge anymore. He stood in a vast, ethereal space, not the familiar dark, shadowy void of the Vestige realm, but a great hall with a ceiling made of swirling nebulae and a floor of polished silver that reflected the starlight. Pillars of pure, white light soared up into the cosmic expanse. It felt ancient, sacred, and he was not alone. They stood before him, the previous users of One for All. But they were not as he remembered them. They were not ghosts in their hero costumes. They were archetypes, mythic figures cast in spectral light. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, was a slender, robed figure whose form seemed woven from starlight itself, his face gentle and wise. The second and third users were stern, silent sentinels in heavy, archaic armor. Haikid Shinomori was a stoic warrior and samurai-like lameller, his hands resting on the hilt of a spectral katana. Daigoro Banjo was a boisterous figure of pure energy, laughing silently, and was cloaked in swirling, protective shadows. And then there was Nana Shimura. She stood before the others, not in her hero costume, but in the raiment of a warrior queen. A flowing cape of shimmering, silver light billowed behind her, and a simple, elegant circlet rested on her brow. She looked strong, regal, and her kind, familiar smile was the most reassuring sight Deku had ever seen. She glided forward, her form radiating a gentle warmth. "Do not be afraid, young one," her voice echoed, not in his ears, but directly in his mind. It was a voice of pure compassion and unshakable strength. "Nana-san?" Deku breathed, tears welling in his eyes. "Where am I? What's happening?" "You are where you have always been when you need us most," she replied, her smile widening. "Within the heart of the embers. Within One for All." She gestured to the grand hall around them. "This power is more than just a quirk, Izuku. It is a legacy of hope. A promise that no matter how dark the night, a light will always remain. That truth transcends worlds." "But I'm alone," Deku choked out, the despair he'd been holding back finally breaking through. "All might, my friends. I'm not strong enough to do this by myself." Nana reached out and placed a spectral hand on his cheek. It was cool, like starlight, but it sent a wave of courage and warmth through his entire being. "You have never been alone," she said softly. "We are with you. Our wills, our strength, our hope, they are yours. You are our inheritor. Your path is still that of a hero, young one." Her expression became firm, resolute. "The stage has simply changed." The conviction in her voice was absolute. It was a balm to his frayed soul, a reforging of his own heroic spirit. He was not a lost boy. He was a hero on a mission. The mission had just become stranger than he could have ever imagined. "Rest now, Ninth," Nana said, her form beginning to fade. "Your new allies are waiting. Do not disappoint them. Do not disappoint us." The great hall of starlight dissolved, and he was plunged back into the warm, comforting darkness of sleep. Deku awoke with a start. He was still in the corner of the forge, a rough wool blanket draped over his shoulders. The forge was quieter now, the main fire banked low. The air was cool. He must have been asleep for hours. He felt better. The deep, soul-crushing exhaustion was gone, replaced by a quiet clarity. His ribs still ached, but the pain was a dull throb, not a sharp spike. Nana's words echoed in his mind, a pillar of strength. The stage has simply changed. Lyra was sitting on a nearby crate, watching him. Her usual cynical mask was gone, replaced by a look of genuine curiosity. "You were out for most of the day," she said. "You were mumbling in your sleep." Before Deku could respond, Sir Kalen approached. His entire demeanor had transformed. The weary slump was gone, his shoulders were thrown back. He stood tall, the way a knight should. The haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a burning, fervent fire. He had spent the hours Deku slept weighing a lifetime of disgrace against a single, impossible spark of hope. He had made his choice. He held a long, cloth-wrapped object in his hands. "When my house fell," Kalen began, his voice steady and clear, "I lost more than my title. I lost my purpose. For 10 years, I have been a ghost in my own kingdom, hammering out horseshoes and mending plows, while the man who destroyed my family sits on the throne. I let my anger turn to bitterness, and my bitterness to apathy. I forgot what it meant to be a knight of House Brine." He stopped before Deku and knelt, the movement fluid and practiced, an echo of 1,000 formal ceremonies from a life he thought was over. He laid the cloth-wrapped object on the floor before Deku. Lyra's eyes widened in shock. This was the formal posture of a knight swearing an oath of fealty. "Today," Kalen continued, his eyes locked on Deku, "I saw something I thought was long dead. Hope. You are the fulfillment of a legend I thought was a myth. You are the answer to a prayer this kingdom has forgotten how to speak." He unwrapped the object. It was his sword. It was a magnificent weapon, a long sword of dark, beautifully forged steel, with a simple, unadorned cross guard and a pommel wrapped in worn leather. It was a knight's sword, made for duty, not for show. "I, Kalen of the fallen House of Brine, swear my sword, my life, and my gift to your cause," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction in the quiet forge. "The embers of heroes have reignited in you, the Emerald Knight. Allow me to serve you. Allow me to help you become the champion this kingdom needs. Let me reclaim my honor by serving yours." He bowed his head, waiting. Deku was speechless. This was too much, too fast. He wasn't a lord or a king. He was just a hero, a kid from Mizurufu. But looking at Kalen's bowed head, he saw the immense weight of the man's hope, his desperation for a cause to believe in. He remembered Nana's words, "Your new allies are waiting." He couldn't refuse. This man wasn't just swearing to him, he was dedicating himself to the ideal of one for all, the embers of heroes. He was the first soldier in their war against this world's all for one. Slowly, Deku reached out and placed his hand on the hilt of the offered sword. "Stand up, Sir Kalen," Deku said, his voice imbued with a newfound authority that surprised even himself. "I accept your service. But you will not serve me. You will serve the people of Ethelgard, alongside me." Kalen looked up, a tear tracing a clean path through the soot on his cheek. He stood, his face alight with a renewed purpose. The disgraced man was gone. In his place stood a knight once more. Lyra let out a long, slow breath, shaking her head in disbelief. "Wonderful," she drawled, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "Now we have a divine relic in a boy's body and a rusty knight with a hero complex. We've officially graduated from a small-time escort mission to a full-blown holy war." She pushed herself off the crate and walked over to them, a wry smile playing on her lips. "I hope you know what you're doing, puppy. Because I have a feeling things are about to get a lot more interesting." Deku looked from the fiercely loyal knight to the sharp-witted, cynical rogue. One his mentor, the other his guide. He felt the steady, reassuring presence of the vestiges within him. For the first time since he'd arrived, he didn't feel lost. He had a mission. He had allies. He had a purpose. His journey home was still an impossible dream, but a new path had opened before him, the path of the Emerald Knight. And he would walk it. The morning after the oath was raw and new. A fragile dawn broke over the soot-stained rooftops of Ironwood, its light cutting through the ever-present haze of the forges. Inside Theron's smithy, the air was thick with the scent of old coal and the electric tang of possibility. The trio, the earnest boy god, the reborn knight, and the cynical rogue, stood in the relative quiet, the momentous events of the previous night settling around them like a heavy cloak. Kalen was a man transformed. The weary, ghost-like figure was gone, replaced by a knight whose inner fire now burned brighter than the forge itself. He moved with a purpose that had been absent for a decade, his stormy gray eyes clear and focused. He paced the stone floor, his mind already a whirlwind of strategy and preparation. "We cannot stay in Ironwood for long," he began, his voice a commander's baritone, no longer rough from disuse. "Your display in Oakhaven was a spark. My oath to you is the kindling. Malaker's spies are everywhere. They will hear of a disgraced knight suddenly finding his spine, and they will connect it to the whispers of a green-clad stranger. We have a brief window before that attention becomes an iron fist." Deku, seated on the stool where he'd collapsed, nodded slowly. He had slept deeply, the visit from the vestiges leaving him with a strange sense of calm and resolve. Nana Shimura's words, "The stage has simply changed," echoed in his heart. "What do we do?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it held the weight of his acceptance. He was no longer just trying to get home. He was committing to the fight here. "We forge a weapon," Kalen declared, stopping to look at Deku. "And I do not mean a sword. I mean you. You have the power, the embers of heroes, but you wield it like a club. It is raw, untamed. You fight like a brawler, a force of nature. But a knight is a scalpel. Precision. Control. Discipline. A hero in this land is not just a symbol of hope, they are a symbol of martial perfection." Lyra, leaning against a rack of hammers with her arms crossed, let out a skeptical snort. "Martial perfection? Most knights I've seen are just entitled bullies in shiny tin cans who are good at hitting things. The ones who win are the ones who fight dirty. And you will teach him that," Kalen said, turning to her, his expression serious. "You will teach him how to survive, how to see the traps before they are sprung, how to move unseen, how to understand the language of the shadows you so clearly call home. But I will teach him how to be a beacon. A knight must know how to fight in the mud, yes, but he must also know how to stand in the light." The plan was set. Their training ground would be a secluded courtyard behind the smithy, shielded from prying eyes by high stone walls. Their timeline was short, a week, perhaps two at most, before the risk of discovery grew too great. "First," Kalen said, gesturing to Deku's tattered hero costume, "that will not do. It is a symbol from your world, not this one. It is the skin of a boy named Deku. We must forge the armor of the Emerald Knight." He looked to Theron, the massive smith who had been silently observing the entire exchange. "I will need your finest steel, my friend, and the full heat of your forge." Theron, who had seen his friend waste away for 10 years, cracked a rare, small smile. "The forge has been waiting, Kalen. Let's give it a fire worth burning." The first lesson began that afternoon. Kalen handed Deku a sword. It wasn't his own noble blade, but a simple, unadorned training sword, heavy and blunt, with a weighted balance that felt alien in Deku's hands. He was used to his fists, his feet, the familiar feel of his gauntlets and iron saws. This was a cold, detached length of steel. "You have fought your whole life with your body as the weapon," Kalen explained, circling him in the dusty courtyard. "Your instincts are to close the distance, to overpower, to become the center of the conflict. A sword is an extension of your will, not just your arm. It creates distance. It controls the space between you and your foe. You must unlearn as much as you learn." Deku gripped the hilt, his knuckles white. He tried to adopt a stance, mirroring something he'd seen in a movie once. Kalen shook his head with a sigh. "No. You are bracing for a punch. Your center of gravity is too low, too aggressive. You are thinking of impact. Think of flow. Of geometry." For the next hour, Kalen didn't let him swing the sword once. He only made him practice stances. The high guard, the low guard, the hanging guard. He corrected Deku's footwork, the angle of his shoulders, the grip of his fingers on the leather-wrapped hilt. It was tedious, frustrating work. Deku's body, so accustomed to the explosive freedom of full cowling, felt caged and awkward. My feet should be shoulder-width apart, but my back foot needs to be angled at 45 degrees to allow for a pivot into a lunge or a retreat, Deku began to mutter, his analytical mind finally finding a foothold in the unfamiliar discipline. The blade should be an extension of my forearm, not my wrist, to prevent strain and telegraphing the movement. The balance point is 3 inches above the crossguard, so any parry needs to be made with the lower third of the blade to maximize leverage. Kalen smiled faintly. Good. You are not just memorizing. You are understanding. The mind is the knight's sharpest weapon. The body is merely the vessel, the sword merely the tip. Finally they sparred. Kalen, using a similar blunt training sword, moved with a fluid, economic grace that belied his years of inactivity. He didn't use any grand, sweeping motions. It was all small parries, quick feints, and precise footwork. He completely dismantled Deku. Every time Deku tried to attack, Kalen's blade was there to intercept, turning Deku's momentum against him. He was disarmed 4 times in 5 minutes. Frustration mounted. On the 5th attempt, Deku's instincts took over. As Kalen's blade came in for another disarming maneuver, Deku let a tiny, 0.5% flicker of one for all surge into his arm. His parry was unnaturally fast, knocking Kalen's sword aside with a loud clang. He stood there, panting, a flicker of pride on his face. He'd finally landed a solid block. No, Kalen said, his voice sharp and disappointed. He lowered his sword. You cheated. I just used my power, Deku protested. It's what I have. You used it as a crutch, Kalen corrected him sternly. You relied on its speed to compensate for your lack of skill. What happens when you face an opponent who is faster? Or one whose gift negates your own? Will you simply crumble? He stepped forward, his eyes intense. The embers of heroes are a gift, not a replacement for discipline. You must be a master swordsman without it, so that when you choose to use it, the combination is not just effective. It is divine. It is unstoppable. Do you understand? The words hit Deku harder than any physical blow. He was All Might's successor. All Might had been the perfect symbol because his strength was matched by his skill and experience. Deku had been so focused on mastering the raw output of One for All that he neglected the finer points of combat. Kalen was right. He bowed his head. I understand. Again, they trained until the twin moons rose, until Deku's arms felt like lead and his body screamed in protest. But by the end of it, he could hold his own for 30 seconds before being disarmed. It was progress. Lyra's lessons were a different kind of ordeal entirely. She didn't use the courtyard. Her classroom was the city itself, in the dead of night. She dragged him from the relative safety of the forge into the winding, shadowed alleys of Ironwood. Knights fight on battlefields, she'd said, her voice a low whisper as they crouched in a darkened doorway, watching the drunks stumble out of a nearby tavern. Heroes fight everywhere else. A battlefield has rules, clear enemies. A city street has none. Everyone is a potential threat, and everything is a potential weapon. Her first lesson was in observation. Watch them, she commanded, gesturing to the tavern patrons. Don't just look. See. Who is angry? Who is afraid? Who is looking for a pocket to pick? Deku tried, his analytical mind whirring. The big man is angry, he's clenching his fists. The one in the corner is afraid, he's making himself small. The woman by the door is... I don't know. Wrong, and you're not even close. Lyra sighed. The big man isn't angry, he's grieving. Look at his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he raises his mug. He's drinking to forget. The one in the corner isn't afraid, he's a spotter. He's watching the guards patrol route for his friends inside. And the woman by the door? She's the danger. She's not watching anyone. Everyone is watching her. She's confident, she's in control. She's probably the one running the whole pickpocketing ring. Deku was stunned. Lyra read people like he read quirk analyses, seeing the hidden mechanics beneath the surface. For the next hour, she made him sit there, breaking down the subtle ballet of body language, intent, and social dynamics. Her next lesson was movement. She took him to the market square, now deserted and spooky under the moonlight. "Cross the square," she said. "I'll be on that rooftop. If I can see you, you fail." Deku tried to use the skills he'd learned as a hero, darting from cover to cover. It was clumsy. His costume, even torn, was too distinctive. He made too much noise. A loose cobblestone, a stray cat, everything seemed to betray him. Halfway across, a small pebble, thrown with pinpoint accuracy, bounced off his head. "You're dead," Lyra's voice echoed from the darkness above. "A rooftop archer just put an arrow through your eye. You move like a spooked cow. You need to be a shadow. Use the pools of darkness. Time your movements with the wind, with the creak of a distant sign. Become part of the background noise." They did it again and again. Deku, ever the diligent student, began to adapt. He started to feel the rhythm of the city night, to see the pathways of shadow instead of the open ground. He learned to control his breathing, to place his feet with absolute silence. It was the inverse of his hero persona. He wasn't trying to be seen, he was trying to disappear. "You're a hero," she told him as they finally headed back to the forge, the first hints of dawn on the horizon. "That means people will want to kill you. Not just fight you, kill you. They won't challenge you to an honorable duel in a sunny field. They'll slip poison in your drink, put a knife in your back in a crowded street, or hire an assassin to kill you in your sleep. My training isn't as noble as Kalen's, but it'll keep you alive long enough for his to matter." While Deku trained, Kalen and Theron worked at the forge. The process of creating the armor for the Emerald Knight was a sacred ritual. Theron, the master of the physical, worked the bellows until the fire roared, a ravenous beast of white-hot flame. He selected the finest steel ingots, folding them again and again, hammering out impurities, his movements a powerful, rhythmic dance he had perfected over a lifetime. He was not just a smith, he was an artist, and this was to be his masterpiece. He didn't try to replace Deku's strange, futuristic suit. Instead, he worked to augment it. He forged plates of his masterwork, folded steel, thin, light, but impossibly strong, shaped perfectly to fit over the most vulnerable parts of Deku's costume, the chest, the shoulders, the forearms, and the shins. Each piece was a work of art, curved and angled to deflect blows and distribute impact. The most complex piece was the helmet. Deku's iconic hood and mask were part of his identity, but they offered little real protection. Kalen wanted to preserve the silhouette while creating a functional piece of armor. Theron forged a lightweight helm, open-faced but with a reinforced nasal guard and sweeping cheek plates. It was designed to be worn under the hood, with two horn-like crests forged onto the top that would protrude through specially made slits, mimicking the ears of his original mask. It was a perfect fusion of the hero Deku and the knight he was to become. Once Theron's work was done, Kalen's began. This was the part that was pure magic. Deku watched, mesmerized, as Kalen prepared for his work. He didn't use a hammer or tongs. He used a set of fine, silver-tipped chisels and a small, intricately carved stone. He would place a newly forged steel plate onto a large, flat-topped anvil that was covered in faded, complex geometric patterns. Then, he would close his eyes. When he opened them, his gray eyes glowed with a soft, internal silver light. He would place his left hand on the steel plate, and it would begin to hum with a low, resonant energy. In his right hand, he would take up a chisel. "My gift is in my touch and in my will," Kalen explained, his voice distant, focused. "I feel the spirit of the metal, its potential, and I inscribe my will upon it. I give it a purpose beyond its form." He touched the chisel to the chest plate. A brilliant silver line appeared in the metal, not a scratch, but a groove of pure, glowing light. He began to move the chisel with fluid, unerring grace, carving a complex, spiraling symbol into the center of the plate. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something ancient and powerful. The rune pulsed with light, a silver heart beating on the dark steel. "This is an Aegis rune," Kalen said, his voice strained with concentration. "The rune of the unwavering shield. It will not make the metal unbreakable, but it will absorb and disperse the first moments of a powerful impact, turning a killing blow into a staggering one." He moved on to the gauntlets. On each, he carved a smaller, more aggressive-looking rune, sharp and angular. The rune of redirection. Any force you parry with these will have its energy partially turned back on your attacker. A sloppy swing will numb their arms. On the greaves and iron sawls, he carved runes of feather-like elegance. The rune of inertia. It will lessen the strain on your joints when you land from a great height or push off with great force. It will help your body withstand the kickback from your own power. The process was slow, painstaking. Each rune took hours of intense concentration. By the end of it, Kalen would be pale and drenched in sweat, the silver light in his eyes fading back to gray. But the results were breathtaking. The plain steel plates had been transformed into artifacts. The silver runes pulsed with a gentle, living light, a stark and beautiful contrast to the dark metal. Finally, after nearly a week of tireless work, it was all finished. They presented the completed armor to Deku. The base was still his familiar green suit, now expertly repaired by Lyra's surprisingly skilled hands. But over it were the dark, rune-etched plates, gleaming in the forge light. The helmet felt solid and reassuring in his hands. He put it on. The fit was perfect. The plates were so well articulated they barely restricted his movement. The weight was substantial but balanced. He pulled the hood up, settling the helmet underneath. He looked at his hands, encased in the runic gauntlets. He stomped a foot, feeling the strange, comforting hum from the greaves. He was no longer just Deku in a hero costume. He was something more. Something new. With the armor complete, the final stage of his training began, synthesis. He stood in the courtyard, fully armored, his new sword in hand. Kalen and Lyra stood by, watching. You are a swordsman. You are a shadow. And you are a vessel for the embers of heroes, Kalen said. Now you must be all three at once. Show us. Deku took a deep breath, the air tasting different through the helmet. He closed his eyes, centering himself. He felt the weight of the armor, the balance of the sword, the familiar thrum of one for all waiting under his skin. He activated full cowling. The green lightning erupted from him, no longer just crackling around his skin, but now arcing between the silver runes on his armor, causing them to pulse in sympathy. The sight was spectacular, a fusion of primal energy and ancient magic. Come at me, Lyra said, a wicked grin on her face. She drew her twin daggers and dashed forward, a blur of dark leather. Deku met her charge. He didn't just block with his sword, he moved with the flow Kalen had taught him, deflecting her dagger with a smooth parry. At the same time, he used Lyra's own lessons, seeing the intent in her eyes, the way she shifted her weight for her next attack. He saw her feinting a low stab to go for a high one. Instead of just blocking, he dropped low and activated smokescreen. A thick, roiling cloud of black smoke instantly filled the courtyard. It was far more effective now, no longer just a simple diversion. It was the apparition's veil. Lyra, caught off guard, skidded to a halt inside the cloud, her senses useless. Clever, puppy! She coughed. From within the smoke, Deku moved. He used float, but not to fly. He used it to launch himself silently into the air, a blessed leap that carried him above the smoke cloud. He looked down, a predator spotting his prey. As the smoke began to clear, he dropped. He came down sword first, a descending strike aimed not at Lyra, but at the ground beside her. At the last second, tendrils of black energy erupted from his back and arms. Black whip? But to Lyra and Kalen, they were not just energy whips. They were writhing, semi-sentient ribbons of pure shadow, lashing out with terrifying speed and precision. They were living shadow chains. The chains didn't strike Lyra. They wrapped around her daggers, yanking them from her grasp, and coiled around her ankles, immobilizing her in an instant. She was trapped, disarmed, and helpless, with the point of Deku's sword buried in the dirt an inch from her foot. Silence. The shadow chains dissolved back into his body. The lightning receded. Deku stood over her, breathing heavily from the effort of controlling so many aspects of his power at once. Lyra looked from her empty hands to her trapped feet, then up at him. The grin on her face was one of genuine, unrestrained shock and admiration. Okay, she breathed out. I take it back. You're not a puppy anymore. Kalen strode forward, a look of immense pride on his face. He clapped Deku on his new armored shoulder. That, that was the beginning of something truly great. The fusion of skill, stealth, and divine power, that is the fighting style of the Emerald Knight. Later that night, after the training was done, Deku stood alone in the forge. The fires were banked, the tools were all put away. It was quiet. On the polished surface of a large, unused shield hanging on the wall, he saw his reflection for the first time. The person looking back was not the eager, often frightened UA student he knew. The figure was taller, broader, clad in a perfect synthesis of two worlds. The familiar green was the foundation, the color of hope. But over it lay the dark, pragmatic steel of Ethelgard, etched with silver runes that pulsed with a gentle, inner light. The helmet concealed his face, but the horn-like crests were an unmistakable silhouette, a nod to the symbol he had once aspired to be. The sword at his hip felt natural now, an extension of his arm. The green lightning of One for All danced faintly across the runes, a visible sign of the immense power simmering just beneath the surface. He didn't see Izuku Midoriya. He didn't even see the hero Deku. He saw a knight, a figure of legend, pulled from a fairy tale and given form. He saw the Emerald Knight. And for the first time, he felt he could truly live up to the name. The door to the forge creaked open. Lyra stood there, her expression serious. "The time for training is over," she said, her voice low. "I was in the market, listening. Word has come from the south. One of Malachus' lieutenants, a man they called Gideon the Petrifier, is terrorizing the farmlands near the Amber Hills. He has a gift that turns flesh to stone, and he's making a brutal example of anyone who withholds their tithes. He's creating statues of suffering farmers in the village squares." The casual cruelty of it made Deku's blood run cold. "The rebellion is a whisper right now," Lyra continued. "It needs a voice. It needs a victory. It needs a hero to show the people that Malachus monsters can be beaten." Kalen emerged from the shadows behind her, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "It is a test," he said. "A true quest. It is time for the Emerald Knight to ride." Deku looked from their determined faces back to his own reflection in the shield. The time for hiding, for learning, for preparing, was over. His purpose was clear. His body and mind were honed. His armor was forged. He was ready.